with Cleo Integration Cloud, the engine at the heart is all about business process automation. And that's a little different from some of the legacy technologies that are out there. And that's the process. And that's what Cleo captures. And it's the process that gives companies their differentiation. One of the reasons that there's value to be added, because two different companies can use CIC and can engage with Corsica, but end up with two totally different outcomes that match their business, right? And that's where there's true value.
Welcome back to Unraveling IT Expert Tech Talks. I'm Peter Rodenhauser, Chief Revenue Officer at Corsica Technologies, and today we're taking a hard look at what it really means to be a great partner in the digital supply chain era. If you've ever tried to manage a business relationship that spans departments, systems, and continents, you know it's not just about contracts and KPIs, it's about trust, ownership, and the art of keeping promises. In today's interconnected world, relationship management isn't just a buzzword. It's the backbone of growth and resilience. Joining me today is Frank Kenney, who leads market strategy and industry solutions at Cleo. Frank's seen firsthand how the right approach to relationship management can transform not just supply chains, but entire business models. So today, we'll uncover how effective relationship management transforms business partnerships, streamlines operations, and drives growth in today's interconnected digital landscape. Whether you're a supply chain professional, a business leader, or someone who's tired of chasing down answers across departments, this episode is for you. Let's jump in.
Relationship management, that's a big topic. So, maybe we start there around a definition of, what does that mean in the realm of supply chain and ecosystem integration?
Yeah, I think that it's always very helpful to think about any IT terms. And, this is what frustrates me about all of the discussion around AI, but that's another podcast, right? Whenever you think about any IT term or any IT trend or anything else like that, relationship management or anything, I think it's important to relate it back to the real world, the world that we live in. In any relationship between two individuals, two companies or whatever, every relationship is based on a set of expectations. I expect you to do this and carry yourself this way. You expect me to do something and carry myself that way. And in IT, the relationships they also have expectations. So you may have a retailer that says, well, I expect things to be on time within an hour of drop off, right? And you can't come more than an hour before, you can't arrive more than an hour after, that kind of thing, right? And I also expect what you told me you were shipping me, I expect that to be what shipped. So this OTIF, on time in full, is a perfect example of an expectation that you'll find retailers have from their suppliers. Now, there are other types of expectations on everything from where you're sourcing. Are you sourcing ethically? How are you pricing? You're not going to take advantage of, some weather event that's happening and gouging and those types of things. There are also expectations around privacy and the things that you're doing. But in a nutshell, when we talk about relationship management, we talk about the collection of those expectations and ensuring that you meet the collection of those expectations. On one hand, you want to meet those expectations because a happier partner is a partner that buys more, right? And that's when you get into things like NPS scores and, how happy are my customers with me? They buy more. Those things do matter. Those surveys do matter because that tells them where to fit and where they may be slipping. From a very fiscal perspective, the lack of compliance to an expectation, right? Or the violation of that expectation usually results in chargebacks, which is a wonderful process in which the money that you owe someone, you can actually lower the amount that you owe someone by charging them a fee because they didn't meet those expectations, chargebacks. And if you think about retail CPG and you think about how tiny those margins are, you don't want too many chargebacks because you lose a good customer and they're paying you just what you spent. So it really hurts the pockets. So the idea of relationship management from an IT perspective starts to become a very top level consideration, as it is the representation of the relationship you have with your buyers or your suppliers. terms.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up, chargebacks. When I first got into the data integration space back in the early 2000s, doing implementations for, retail suppliers, I learned about chargebacks very quickly. In terms of what they mean to the business and how to avoid them. And, in the realm of relationship management, I think in today's world, it's one aspect of the relationship, right? And that to me is what I've seen evolve. I mean, chargebacks is a rather draconian way of managing a vendor, maybe an important way. I think some looked at it as maybe a revenue source or a discount source, but some were truly looking at it as a way to drive, compliance. And I think, compliance is a big part of this, relationship management as well. As data integration and supply chains have evolved and become more digital, how are you seeing that change and evolve relationship management?
When I'm tracking compliance to a set of expectations, when I've tracked enough, I can start to establish trends, and I can start to establish, well, what are the habits and what's being done? I can pull efficiency out of that, right? Or sometimes I don't have to pull efficiency. I can change what my expectations are. So especially in any sophisticated supply chain, I'm going to have multiple suppliers. And there are going to be some suppliers I use for some things and some suppliers I use in other situations. I think that the tariff situation that's currently happening in the US is a perfect example of that. We've watched tariffs be very high when it comes to doing business with China. And at the same time, in other nations and in Asia, those tariffs are lower. So you're buying the same thing, but maybe you'll buy from that partner. And maybe that partner you can't hold to a higher standard because maybe the port situation or the logistics situation that's happening in country in places like Vietnam or Laos or some of the countries that may not be as logistics savvy as what you're seeing in China, right? So the expectations change, but you can start to address the fragility of the supply chain, that you can start to achieve agility as things change in a tariff situation, and also understand what that impact is going to be because you've been measuring compliance to a relationship. You've been measuring what are the things typically they do. They can't help it. It's always X amount of time late. They can't help it. It's always 10 units short. You can start to establish those things. And I tend to think, Peter, when you're dealing with expectations, you're not dealing with good or bad. They just are. Because if I know this, then I can have a conversation with the consumer that this is going to occur. So it's not a matter of good or bad. And I agree with you, chargebacks, kind of an old way of thinking, right? Because then compliance becomes a bad, dirty word, and I can't use it to give myself strategic differentiation. I can't use it to really sell myself in a better way or say I'm a better partner, etc. But relationship management and compliance and expectations, again, not good or bad. They're just new data inputs that you can use to get the most out of your supply chain and have the supply chains that you want to build are predictable, are consistent, are dependable. And to achieve all of that, you need the same thing. You need to understand what's going to happen. You need a good prediction of what's going to happen, good, better, and different. So relationship management is, I think, another set of data that you can use to improve relationships and improve the facilitation of commerce.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I want to get into how the Cleo platform, Cleo Integration platform really addresses it and empowers customers to leverage it. But, at Corsica, the approach that we've taken and going to market with is to help mid-sized organizations manage their data integration environments. And of course, we struck a partnership with Cleo about a year ago, and it's been great. And, something I've noticed as supply chain and data integration has evolved from what I would call a traditional, linear model, right? Where you have, your supplier, distributor, manufacturer, out to the retailer. It's much more networked now. It's much more dynamic. And, I'm seeing the management of that dynamic network much more feasible in the Cleo platform. itself for our customers that we've transitioned over from more legacy, traditional EDI, software applications into the Cleo Integration Cloud. So as it relates to relationship management, can you talk a little bit about how the Cleo Integration Cloud is addressing that and really empowering the customers to take advantage of it? Because I'm seeing what we're seeing for our customers as we onboard them is that their eyes are getting very big and open to the art of the possible.
Yeah, I thank you for that. And again, congratulations to both teams for, what has been a successful partnership. At the heart of what we have here at Cleo with Cleo Integration Cloud, the engine at the heart is all about business process automation. That's a little different from some of the legacy technologies that are out there. Legacy B2B technologies have always concentrated on doing field level, EDI level transformation. So this is my namespace and I'm going to pull from here and put it to here. This is my delivery date, so I'm going to pull it from this document and put it to here. And I think that that's okay. And that was very necessary. And maybe they pushed it to some AS2 somewhere. But when you start to think about all aspects of everything from the transformation, if this is here, then do this, right? That's a microflow. And you start to think about, well, with this purchase order, there needs to be an acknowledgement. So now you have a very explicit process that exists. And after the acknowledgement, there may be some type of status update. And then after that, there may be some type of inventory instruction. Hey, pull this and do that. And then after that, there may be some type of load tendering. All right, let's get the truck in there and status update, status update, status update. And then you have delivery and proof of delivery with the BOL. Of course, and I jumped over, there's an advanced shipping notice in there somewhere. And then that leads to a set of invoices. And that's the process, right? And that's what Cleo captures. And it's the process that gives companies their differentiation. And so we have an incredible tool. Corsica has the knowledge, the best practices, and the expertise. So we've just given you a more flexible and more agile tool for you to ask your customers questions that they're not used to being asked about things like, okay, what happens if this doesn't work? Well, we can build an exception for that, right? And we can build an exception for those exceptions. Oh, what happens when you have to go take a look at, a credit score? Well, Corsica can take that transaction and, because it's a set of flows, build another flow that goes out to one of the credit scoring agencies for logistics, like a carrier for 411 to find out what the status is. Or it could go to, a Hoover or an Equifax or whatever to find out a credit score of an organization. And then bring that back in and include that in the package that goes to an ERP. So you can customize processes that give your customer uniqueness because of the extensibility of CIC. And because CIC is more so focused on the process, right? Every aspect of the process, which includes integrating 2 points, because that's how you build the process out. So I think that's one of the reasons that we're seeing success, and one of the reasons that there's value to be added, because 2 different companies can use CIC and can engage with Corsica, but end up with 2 totally different outcomes that match their business, right? And that's where there's true value. What has given us to Relationship Manager, which is really, really interesting, is because of the way our platform works, we can track volume. We can track how many of these processes, how many of these purchase orders have you taken in and have you done? And there's value to that. And because we have processes that do some transformation, right? We can understand and pick out those processes that represent physical values like units, or more important, money. So this purchase order is this much, is worth this much. These purchase orders from this partner that came in today have a value of this much attached to them. And that's incredibly helpful when you think about from a sales perspective. That's incredibly helpful when you think about from a handling perspective, or when you do have exceptions, how severe is that exception that you need to handle. So volume and value, but also disposition in terms of, did the process execute or did it not execute? And that's incredibly important, especially when you're talking about issue resolution and you talk about operations and where should I start to look for why things didn't happen. And if I can get a disposition before my customer knows that it didn't happen, then I proactively can let them know. And that is incredibly valuable. And then finally, because we can see the time it takes from one event to another event, because we can see that value of time, we can now say, okay, how long should it take? And our technology allows you to go in and customize, this is how long it needs to take. And if it takes longer than that, let me know, execute this process, right? And if it's not, then it's all green across the board. And the opportunity to move that scale so that you have an expectation of how long that process should execute. And so we're talking about how long does it take from the time a purchase order comes in to the time you send out a shipping notice? How long does it take from the time that you get a load tender that you ship out an acknowledgement? Additionally, if you've got a company that says, I need a carrier check because carrying automotive parts, I need a carrier check that happens every 15 minutes because ultimately this part is going to end up going to a mechanic and that person is sitting in the waiting room. So we need to know where that part is. I need a carrier check every 10 minutes. You have the opportunity to see that, hey, it's coming up to 8 minutes and we haven't done this. We need to do that. We need to take action. So you can be very proactive. Again, that's all around managing the relationship. But this idea that we understand volume, we understand value, we understand disposition, and we understand time because we're built on processes is very, very, very useful. And it's something our customers are finding differentiated and something that really helps them become indispensable to their customers.
That's so awesome to hear because when we think about cloud platforms and cloud products, so much has been made. And I think in the initial moves to the cloud was around, one of the V's that you mentioned, visibility. But, everything you're articulating there is about how the Cleo Integration Cloud or the CIC is driving value. Driving value to something so, what historically has been so straightforward as a business transaction. Maybe it's a purchase order, maybe it's an invoice, maybe it's a ship notice. You're talking about, through the platform, packaging up and delivering more value. And the power of that is as a supplier in the supply chain ecosystem. Now, you're not just checking the box saying, sure, manufacturer, I can provide you these transactions electronically. Not only can I do that, but I can package up and provide more value. As we close out here, Frank, one of the things you mentioned at the beginning, I want to bring it back to, vendor scorecarding and chargebacks. As you're talking about the power of the CIC, how is the platform helping and relationship management really helping Cleo customers manage and track that compliance and maybe even violations of some of those scorecards?
I would love to tell you a great IT answer that we're feeding information to the service desk and our customers are proactively able to jump in front of things and make things happen and keep customers happy. And that is certainly a use case that our customers have found value. But, interestingly, Peter, they found value in very specific ways. Sales. So a sales manager that goes into CIC and goes into our relationship manager can very, very quickly see what's the volume and what's the value of things that are currently in the system that may not be processed by the ERP, but that are coming into the system. And, I expected $10,000 worth of orders and there's only 5,000 and it's 12 o'clock. Maybe I should get on the phone, right? Or going back in and I'm getting a status update and I'm pulling it back into my TMS and I can see that this truck is going to be late and the truck's not supposed to get there till tomorrow, but I can see it's going to be late. So maybe I can call and get an exemption from that violation so that it doesn't cost me. And it's very interesting. You and I both know that the finance team only likes to get involved when it comes to signing on, these deals and signing statements of work. The finance team wants to get involved with, hey, we were just told that there is chargebacks for these 10 transactions. And there's nothing that we see in the ERP that would reflect that. Let's go back and let's see how long did these processes take? Did we actually break something? And it becomes almost a system of record for what's really happened. Yeah, Peter, the story I like to tell is back when we had landline telephones in our houses, and this is for all the younger people, we used to have to pay for long distance, right? It used to be really expensive. And I went out on a business trip and I took my family and I came back and I had a huge long distance bill. And I called the phone company And I said, hey, I've got $1,000 worth of calls that were made for my house. There was nobody here, and I need them taken off. And you hear the clicking, the tapping, and she goes, I'm sorry, Mr. Kenney, I'm showing that those calls did originate in your house. And I said, well, I can assure you no one was in my house, so they did not. And she said to me, sure, I'll give you a second to pull up your records of what happened, and then we can compare it to ours. And I said, I have no record of what happened because it didn't happen, and I have no I understand what you're talking about. So the fun part about chargebacks that we've seen is that most companies are told that they have chargebacks. They have no way of proving that they didn't have them. And that has been the key use case for suppliers and suppliers of services like carriers and brokers, suppliers of products, raw goods. The biggest use case for our product is proving that they are compliant and being able to say to their finance team, when the finance team goes and says, hey, this bill and this receipt, this purchase order, and this invoice is not making sense, or this remittance is not making sense. They're saying we have chargebacks. No, here's an absolute independent system that we can rely on. We can fight those things. And that, again, I'd love to tell you that it's IT, but it's other folks in the organization. We are giving the suppliers of these services in the supply chain a way to ensure that they're just not blindly being charged by an error. Because I think and you've been in business long enough, that chargebacks sometimes are a profit center, right? You try to get as much as you possibly can get. That's why they're staffed accordingly. We're bringing some of that back into focus. And that's been some of the rewarding stuff that we've been doing with relationships.
Well, that's huge, Frank. I mean, that's so huge because, again, rewind the clock 20 years ago, right? And, a chargeback notice would come in and you'd have the finance team come over to the EDI administrator and say, hey, we owe this retailer this amount of money because they're saying we didn't provide, this data. And it would take the EDI administrator had to be, fluent in parsing and understanding X12 or NFAC, whatever the standard was, be able to read it and be able to say, yay or nay on whether that was said. Maybe they have to check communication lines. But what you're talking about empowering that finance team and enabling them to actually go in and look at the data themselves. So that's absolutely huge.
That's
I applaud you and the Cleo team for being able to provide that. It's really, really cool. I know I said I was going to wrap up with that topic, but no podcast would be complete in 2025. 26 without talking about what technology topic, AI. So let's talk about how is AI going to, in your opinion, going to impact and change relationship management in the supply chain?
I think the challenge that there are a couple of things that are happening with AI, because we're seeing it all over the supply chain. There's certainly the usage of AI, the way that Cleo is using it, helping us quickly resolve tickets and resolve things and provide to our customers that have full control of the configuration and the operation of our cloud-based platform. And that's incredibly unique. But things happen, hiccups happen, certificates don't get refreshed and updated by partners, right? They get revoked. Someone spills coffee on the SAP server, right? Those types of things happen and you get tickets, and you look at this and it's very technical. And when you can start to use AI to make it human readable, but even more importantly, give you a set of solutions that are based on thousands and thousands and thousands of similar situations on how to resolve some of these things in a step-by-step, very executable way, AI has really just decreased the amount of calls that we're getting into our service center, our help desk, and the types of calls that we're getting in are the types of calls we should be getting in that are multidimensional, have a lot of different context, and in many cases have a time constraint because you're dealing with a high priority customer that you have a strong relationship with. So I love the use of AI for that. I think that always with supply chain and forecasting and those things, and I think that we've had predictive AI for quite a while and we've been able to do that. I'm one that I believe there are a lot of other things that we have to start to think about when we think about, especially agentic AI in the document exchange or the selling and the buying process. AI is a technology that wants to learn, that wants to consume, that wants to understand. And so today, an EDI X12 based inventory request, how much do you have in stock, is a very structured request, and you get a very, very structured answer. An AI agent asking you the same question is going to get more information by asking your one AI agent talking to another AI agent is going to ask much more general set of questions to not only understand the stock, but understand maybe some other key attributes, and may ask you just as a matter of query, as opposed to asking you to, because I'm getting ready to send a purchase order. I'm asking you because once a day, I'm supposed to ask you because I want to track your trend lines, right? So I may be asking you multiple times a day. I think that one of the things, and this is the same thing that we had to figure out with APIs. One of the things we have to start to think about is governance. So the 2026, when I think about AI, I think about the conversations that customers are going to have around, we need to probably hold on to our data a little bit tighter. We need to ensure that we are governing the rules of engagement in a more consistent way. I think we'll see a lot more MCP based environments to at least limit and authenticate and control and meter these interactions with AI agents, so that we are very well aware that we have someone that is hitting us up 15 times a day asking for inventory. And it could be a partner that may have the best intentions, or it could be a partner that is modeling out our secret sauce, our supply chain, and monitoring out when they can get best pricing, because that is how we want to start to look at generative AI to start to get into that world. So, as Gartner and the rest of the analyst firms, predict, and we're kind of coming to the trough of disillusionment, where that we're going down the end where we're trying to say, well, it won't do everything for us, and it can't make toast, right? That kind of thing, until we start to figure out where we can be productive and get to that productivity. And that takes time. In the supply chain, it's going to rapidly head down. And I think that we're going to see the result of lots of heavy AI uses that are being used in an uncontrolled and ungoverned way. We're going to see some surprising impacts to supply chains of maybe folks that we thought had a tighter supply chain, and who are their suppliers for different components, different electrical components, different car components, different battery components. All of those things start to become much more public, or we start to see the clone of those things. You start to be able to go to different marketplaces and get the same product that was sourced with the same materials that may have been assembled much cheaper. So you get a different type of knockoff because of all of the shenanigans that can go into reverse engineering your supply chain. So I think companies need to start to think about, what is truly the value of my product? The value of my product is not only how I build my product, right? How I build a Yeti cup, but it's also the materials that I use to build it, and the pieces of the material, and the composite alloys that I get from the different materials. When you can start to reverse engineer those types of things, then a huge chunk of your differentiation starts to be out there in the wild. So, I think the conversation that we talk about AI is AI and governance, and how do we achieve that? And the genie is already out of the bottle. So not just how do I stop everyone in my company from using ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini, but now it's how do I stop these agents, from my bona fide buyers, from doing too much? How do I stop giving them too much, right? Because I don't want my secret sauce to accidentally slip out. And that requires us to start to look at our supply chains and how we do business and how we manage relationships as truly being secret sauce.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Frank, because and thinking about AI and AI governance, we almost have to go back to data governance, which most companies have data governance in place. Not all, but most do. But how we look at data governance is a little bit different, right? Because who was accessing the data? Well, we as people. Maybe there were some system accounts. Well, now those system accounts are actually AI agents to say, that are not the same as a programmatic account. So, going back to that data governance model and making sure that it's tighter, arguably, making sure that it's tight to protect that data, because once that data is in the hands of the AI agents that are less controlled, then then the genie is truly out of the bottle, right?
Yeah, Peter, think about it from this perspective. If Twitter or X and Reddit said no more free API connections because our business model is built around advertisement and the APIs give too much information with no advertisement. So when you have these two huge social platforms shut those interfaces down, well, guess what? More often than not, those are the same interfaces that agentic AI will leverage. And so we hear about X and we hear about Reddit, but I'm going to ask every supplier that's out there, right? And we know there are millions of them. All of the APIs that you've opened up and all of the AI initiatives that you have in place, imagine if companies that don't even realize that their agents are doing it, they're just trying to get some result. Imagine if you're letting your IP slip through there, the way that you make money slip through there. So it happens with APIs, and magnify that times 1,000, and that's the danger of agentic AI. It's not bad, but as well as I do, Peter, anything ungoverned is going to be an issue because it is going to impact your money. It's going to impact your revenue and what your value can be, because it's going to diminish it when everybody can do the same thing that you can do.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you think about it through the lens that you just provided, which is through the entire supply chain, which is massive, almost infinite in nature. It's amazing and scary all at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, Frank, this has been an awesome conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. And
thanks for being a great partner. Thanks for continuing to be a great partner and doing this stuff for our joint customers. I love the opportunity to reach people that we don't traditionally reach from both sides. So thank you for this initiative. Really appreciate it.
Likewise. Appreciate it. All right. Thanks, Frank.
That's a wrap for today's special episode of Unraveling IT Expert Tech Talks. Huge thanks and shout out to Frank Kenney from Cleo for sharing his insights and helping us rethink what it means to be a great partner in the digital supply chain era. If there's one thing to take away, it's that relationship management isn't just about technology or tools, it's about strategy, ownership, and building partnerships that last. The companies that get this right aren't just more resilient, they're more innovative, more agile, and better positioned for growth. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with your team, and leave us a review. It helps more leaders discover the show. And remember, technology moves fast, but great partnerships move faster. I'm Peter Rodenhauser, and this has been Unraveling IT Expert Tech Talks. See you next time.